The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
So some introductions. This is Dr. Dawn McCormick. She is Associate Professor in the History Department, expert in Egypt and ancient Egypt and archaeology, and is currently the interim Associate Dean of Graduate Studies. She has been the Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. She is conquering every college in the university. I'm Andy Polk. I teach in the History Department. I teach American Religious History as my research field, but I do kind of history teaching, social studies education, that type of stuff. So I do education-y things across campus. So what we're going to try to do today is have a conversation about historical simulations and try to figure out as best as possible some best practices. So a few reasons for this. One, because simulations are becoming ever more popular, uses in the classroom, as we move from a more kind of passive, lecture-centered teaching to more student-centered, skills-based stuff. It's a really good way to go about that. But there can be some challenges and some problems. We know just from our local context, controversy this past year in Rutherford County over the use of historical simulations, what's being done, what that means affecting children. There's a bunch of stuff involved. So in good fashion, because this is just how Don and I generally do things, we want to start off with you talking instead of us. So what we want you to do, to start off, just in your table families, that's what I always call small groups. It's just little families, dysfunctional, and we get to later and larger. We're preparing for Thanksgiving is what basically comes every time. With your table families, discuss what your experience has been with historical simulations. So have you used any? How has that gone? If you haven't, or you've heard stuff, right, what are some ones that you've heard of? Some really good examples, some horror stories. And then what we're trying to tease out are what are the challenges of doing this, practicing this sort of pedagogy, and then what are some ways that we can think about, right? What are some best practices? So we are going to try to get you to do that, and then we'll kind of tease them all out together, and Dawn and I'll give you some examples that we've used to kind of tease this out a little more. So if y'all don't mind, go ahead and go that, and we will creepily walk around and interject ourselves in your conversations.
So that's kind of what I do. And they're using Google Maps to see if the location is still standing there.
I've done it with very small numbers. It's never as good. It's so much. I look forward this year to having some of these larger classes do it because everyone has a role. The voting blocks on the night after they voted and how the vote goes has no determination on their grade. They know this from the beginning, but they totally get into it.
You got to know the background before you can ever adventure into that, because you've got some kids that it can affect them so negatively that you don't want that piece of it.
So to start off on a positive note, what are some experiences you've had that have been really rewarding, helpful, beneficial? What are some simulations that you've done or you've experienced with others? What are some benefits of simulations that you've seen? Oh, that's a bad sign. Yeah? Yes, ma'am?
Miss Gibson here was telling us about what she did because I've never done that before. And she was talking about how much the material just embeds itself into their brains and sticks with them so much more than other things she's used.
Yeah, them doing it, them experiencing it, them researching it, them just enacting it. Yeah, they, especially their stuff that they're doing, they remember very, very well. This is some reacting to the past is a large measure that Dr. McCormick will talk about later, and that's the big benefit. They know their thing, like angrily know their thing and take that position and It's been a long time, but they're really into it right now. So certainly that's a benefit. What else? What are some other benefits? Yes, ma'am?
I think it energizes the rest of the lesson on that standard. It like, I don't know, it just makes it come alive.
Okay, good. Can pique their interests, right? What they're looking at, what they care about, maybe for a time.
I think it allows them to have empathy,
Okay.
which I think is maybe something that sits on the back burner a lot with what we do because of what the public outcry is. But I mean, bringing them to be empathetic with what happened in history, I think helps them to maybe internalize it a little bit.
That's right. Good. Yes.
I think in unique ways it causes the more less motivated students. It forces them to be more interactive, like they're not able to hide as easily in a simulation where they have a critical part. You forced upon them a critical part. It's a lot harder to hide.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when everyone has a thing that the thing can't go on unless everyone does it, yeah, you can't just put your head down and not see. Good. Jamie?
Just a great outlet for self-expression, creativity, which kids don't get to most of the methods, don't get to really share.
Good.
Yeah, I would say too, one of the things that it does, especially if someone is put as someone else, it gives them a freedom to take risks that they wouldn't do as themselves. And sometimes those students who seem like they're just not engaged want to be engaged, but they need to be engaged in a way that actually works for them. And a lot of times it'll bring out things like leadership and things that you never even suspected in a student and they never saw in themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Anything else you can think of? Some benefits of this? I mean, one of the big things that we've seen, right, as standards and just our pedagogy changes, right, to more student-centered, it's just very student-centered in that the students are the center of everything that it's going. I mean, that in itself can be a challenge, right? I stress this with my students who are student teachers that go through. That in large measure is a paradigm change, and that's difficult, right? It's a wholesale change from we are here with information that we give to you to we facilitate you learning and investigating, moving and growing, right? And we still have to give information, but what we do with that is an issue. Good. All right, so what are some challenges that you've seen with this, that you've experienced, that you have heard of?
I'm struggling with the idea of basic skill level.
Okay.
Going to where, for example, in Metro, we're 3 to 5 years below reading level, and I'm going, can they actually read it? Am I?
Sure.
It's the control factor.
Sure.
Give me my nice squeezy laser pointer, and I can go through real quick what they need to know, and maybe if I give them a study guide, they can somewhat regurge back.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, this is part of that paradigm shift, right? There is one, we have to admit, a control factor that is possibly, those of us get into the business, that control thing we kind of like, and we go through it. Those of us kind of tend to lean that way. But it is this issue of there's a certain way that we understand it, right? In a large measure, a system. We give information, we have assessments. When we think of assessments, we think of tests, which are testing their specific knowledge, which the whole thing moves based on an entire way of understanding education. And in large measure, especially history. You got to know about something. And then this breaks out of that. And there's a legitimate one. It makes us uncomfortable sometimes, but there's a legitimate, can they do this? And that's true. That's not like, I'm undertaking. Sometimes I've done it before where, turns out there are some that can't. You have to pull things and you have to figure it out. Often they can do more than I think they can do when we give them chances, but it's a very real challenge. How do I make sure I curate this in such a way that I make sure everyone can participate and become their fullest? It's a lot harder, honestly, than lecture.
I think the flip side of that is for those children that we have who are reluctant learners because they may not possess the skills that we feel like are necessary for it to be successful, because you're teaching to a broader spectrum or you're looking at the material in a different way, it might spear or spark a different kind of reaction with those children who are reluctant learners or who would not necessarily.
So I have another one that I've experienced. I teach the honors section of World Civ here on campus, and my honors students, they know the formula. They know you give them information and they spit it back on the test. And so when you go to do simulations, sometimes they freak out, because it doesn't fit the formula. And so I had a simulation where I had to set up like a prison in the back, it was for ancient Greece. And I had the door covered and they couldn't see in. And then I went back outside and I gave them roles and they came in. And when I got back in, they had reset up the room in the way that it would traditionally be set up. And I couldn't believe it, but they're so programmed. And one of the things I really like about this is that we can push, especially even it's great for some of the students who don't engage. It's also really great for the top students who are so set in their ways, because that's not, the world doesn't work in sort of like get material, test material. It doesn't work that way. So we're taking like these people who could be great leaders in the future. We've got to give them a chance to get outside of the formula so that they will take those chances later on. Yeah.
This is my first year teaching U.S. history. I've never done a simulation, but my experience, I have honors U.S. history this year, and I've always taught traditional kids before, and they like my honors kids this year. I'm like, oh, I'm going to break you up, and you're going to learn this, and then you're going to teach it to each other. And they're like, we hate teaching each other. The other person didn't know what they were saying. And I'm like, well, then you should have asked them questions. Like, they like me talking at them, and my traditional kids have always liked when I don't talk to them. So like it's like weirdly flipped for me this year, and I don't know how to navigate it, because I'm like, you're far more capable than the regular student I've had before, but you just like me to talk to you. And that's boring. But they like that because they know the formula, like you're saying. Yeah. Sorry, that's just a personal frustration.
Yes, ma'am.
I think if you have 4 different preps, I think doing simulation, you need to be aware that you're going to get 4 different reactions. Also, I kind of test drive it with a 5-minute little blurb of an easy simulation, so I can kind of watch behaviors. So when I'm full blown, or I go 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, I can easily facilitate, and it's not that I want to control, it's just that I want to make it run smoothly. But never ever think it's going to run smoothly, because you have to be ready.
Yeah. Smoothly. Yeah. I look forward to that happening one day. Absolutely. Good. Yes, ma'am.
This is a little more practical problem for me, but I have a problem in expecting and not having enough time in my class to really develop it, but they need to be able to research positions, and it's beyond the textbook. And I do a Hamiltonian time simulation, and so the textbook will not be helpful. They have to learn how to go into the databases and things like that, and that is kind of a little bit of a hang-up, but...
Yeah, and we have it in college as well. I mean, I have that in every, whether it's an honors class or regular class, I have it in every single class that I do these simulations. I have some students, though, who come in with pretty good research skills. They teach the other people that they're aligned with how to do it. And I've had students who didn't know how to check out a library book, and were third-year history majors, right? And were scared to death of that whole process. But they had colleagues who then, like the simulations I run are very team-based and competition-based. And so you're working with team members, and that helps them to work with each. It also helps students who are weak, because if you have a weak student, they're put in a group and they may have to read Plato's Republic, which is difficult. But if they do it together and they work on it together with the other resources that we have, they can do a lot of things that I would have never expected either, you know. And that's one of the things I think can be really good with simulations too, because it breaks out of that sort of normal mode. Now it's okay to work with people, right? It's okay to work with your friends. It's okay to learn from them. And that can really be helpful in pushing people beyond their perceived limits.
I found that class size also hinders sometimes. I have like 29 in my class, 5th graders, and they're not developmentally ready to do a lot of this. So to put 29 students in a classroom, it does, it
Yeah.
hinders. It's
But I even see things like wax museum. And my son did a wax museum last year, 4th grade. That's still some of the same kind of thing, right? So it's not like full blown, we're going to turn you loose on history, but even those kinds of things are heading that direction. You know, you're doing research, you're figuring out what you're going to wear, you're doing all that. I mean, that's still simulation, but it's in a way that's a little bit more age appropriate.
And we'll show you in just a little bit. There, in some sense, there are different stages of this. I think a lot of times when we think of simulations, we think like full-blown in the way that we do at top level, reacting to the past stuff of you have a sheet in which you have a long standard and context, and then you go look it up and you read the Republic, and then you figure like that can be. One, you can do that at different levels of involvement and research, but there are also different types of simulations that are often more structured, that are in reality setting you in a place simply to get you to think about things from a certain perspective. We'll get to these really where we run into some issues with simulations, but that's what simulations really get to, right? It's allow you as best you can. We fully understand you never can, absolutely, but to put you in someone's shoes to be able to understand the way they made their decisions. Right? That in essence is the perspective, and then you apply it in different ways. Good. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, kind of went along with what you were saying. One thing that I always run into worry about is the timing, like especially in 8th and 11th grade. You have those tons of standards, and just doing this and letting go. Like you plan it and you think it's going to go 2 days, and it turns into the lesson that will never die. A week later, kids are still working on it. Yeah. And that's one issue I run into, especially with the group I have right now for 11th grade. I've had them ever since they was in 7th grade, and they're like that. When they get something like this, you think, 2 days, a week later, they're still working on it.
Yeah, and I think with competitive simulations, like what I do, you want it to end before they're happy with it, right? Because that just brings them back for more.
I'm sure we'll spend most of our time talking about this too, but adjusting like the level of difficulty in the simulation. When I started teaching with simulations, I would have these elaborate, I get so excited for them. I nerded out on them, and then when I finally brought them to like the class, some of the requirements were just either over their head or like you said, they were too time extensive to really be practical. And so like my biggest struggle with like custom, ones that I create from scratch are, balancing the level of requirements while still teaching the content that's necessary, while still, making it engaging. So
yeah, that's as a whole for this, just this movement into skills-based teaching. There is a time and coverage problem. Right? As much as Tennessee is making baby steps, I think we'll see another adjustment of the standards in the next few years. I know that seems shocking because Tennessee rarely changes the teaching standards. It seems like what's another year? Oh, wait till next year. But this move to the skills-based, I think it's going to help kind of deal with that. But the reality is you have coverage. I only have so much time. So if I spend an entire week on this, I am losing things. And there's a benefit if we're really zeroing in. There's a bunch of learning going on, but there is a reality of, but now I've got to maybe speed past something else. And then just the adjustment of how it works. Part of the issue is, my hope is the second time I do it, it's going to be really good. Because the reality is the first time, I don't know what this is. Like, I'm going to try to over-prepare for everything, but I'm just, you're just kind of...
And when I do reacting ones, sometimes I don't know what's going on the first time around. Yeah. There's so many things happening outside of class and stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and people come in, they're like, wait, you did, what do you, okay, yeah, that's, and you just...
I'm like, hold on, we got to talk about that.
Sure.
What's going on?
There are two, I'm sorry, yes ma'am.
I guess I have kind of two strikes against me. I'm at the alternative school, so my largest class right now is 7 students.
Okay. Yeah.
And they leave. They are in and out in 55-day periods. Sure. So it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, there's no direct answer for that. Part of it is, right, it may be taking a simulation to make sure it by necessity has to be a small group simulation.
Right.
And therefore it becomes your whole class simulation as a small group one. And saying, well, I'm only going to do something that's going to last 2-3 periods at the most, right? So that I know there's a cutoff, so when the transitions happen, then I can change that as I go.
It's just the learning curve is always there.
That's right, always there. Yeah. And that's, right, it is both a challenge and exciting, right? There's a part of this, and I taught high school for years before I went off and did grad school and other stuff. There's part of us that It's a lot easier to have our material and to teach it and to do it because we know it, because there's a lot of other stuff you're going to have to be doing all the time, as you very well know. So that stuff you can control. But there's other parts that after a while that can get kind of boring and monotonous, and sometimes I know teachers that burn out, not necessarily because of all the things that are put upon them and as hard as it is, but because the stuff they're doing doesn't become worth all of that. And sometimes it's because in reality they're doing the same thing and it's not exciting. So there are some ways out of that as well. Two things I want to point out real quick, and then we're going to give some examples of this, of the challenges that kind of relate to, I think, some of the difficulties and controversies, quite honestly, of doing historical simulations. One is making sure that if you're doing a simulation, there's a specific learning objective to the simulation. The story I always tell in my teaching classes with this is before I came to MTSU, I worked at Arkansas State University. I was director of social studies education or something there. But I had one, I would visit our students who were going out in student teaching, doing different things, and I had two students in the exact same semester, independently, and I know it's independently because they did not like each other. They were both in placement, so they're doing 7th grade ancient history, is what they're called in Arkansas State, and they were both doing a simulation that was, we are going to go out to the football field and we are going to simulate for 2 days the ancient Olympic Games. They went through and they were going to go, they were going to have like races and they were going to do a shot put and do different stuff. And I was like, oh, that's great. I asked them what they're doing. I was like, so what's the point? What's the learning objective? I said, well, what do you mean? What are you teaching them? Like, what's the point of them going through that simulation? Well, we're teaching about the ancient Olympic Games. That's your subject. What's the learning objective, right? In the end, there isn't one. It's just you get to go out to the field, which is awesome, unless it's not awesome. If you're a student, I'm like, I'm not going out to the field, right? We can do things sometimes without there being an actual learning objective to it. But the other hinge where it gets really difficult is this of historical empathy. These are really good for instilling part of what we do of skills-based teaching of historical empathy. We must recognize there are limitations to historical empathy. There are limitations in terms of actionable learning objectives and in terms of what we can do in a process. So one of the ways to think and look about that, and we'll come back to this at the end because we see these controversies, is what you cannot have as an objective is students will feel anything. Students will know what it's like to be anything. The few reasons, one is because that is not an achievable learning objective because of humanity. I don't care how good of a teacher you are, you're not going to get there. Right now, students know what it's like to be. No, they fundamentally are not, because they're in your class, coming in their position, they can't. Saying students will feel and therefore no, you cannot have students feel what it means to be another person. You can't have them take their feelings. Our loved ones, our parents and children and spouses and everyone, we don't feel what they feel. We don't know. A bunch of dead people, it's never going to get there. But the other difficulty of it that comes is when we don't understand that that's not objective, but also what those feelings are. There are some times where in simulations you get students to feel things, right? We don't have to talk about this all the time. They get like really worked up and they come through, and especially the competitive stuff. The issue is when you want them to feel, you want to teach them about prejudice or subjugation or oppression So one of my Polkisms is that we tell stories of the past to give meaning to the present. Most people use history. Right? People are arguing, just super upset about the founding fathers. They don't care about the old dead white dudes. They're arguing about the founding fathers to say this is what America was, this is what it should be now, this is my place. They're using that. So I think people come from a good standpoint of simulations that are incredibly controversial, I would say, for very good reason, of a simulation of students are going to be slaves going through the Underground Railroad. We're gonna have some simulation revolving around the Holocaust or Nazi Germany. We're going to do any type of a lead up to the Civil War in which you now need to argue on behalf of slavery and why these are inherently problematic Because one, you'll never get them to feel like anything. Two, there are students. And so getting them to feel oppression or ostracization or fear or intimidation is not a clearly applicable thing for young students. But also, that's not just something that has happened in the past. Most of those things that we want the most to teach them about, they have very clear legacies, as in some of them have not stopped. So it's not but like, yeah, but now they know about that thing that happened in the past and is possibly currently happening in their lives. In pretty much all of those cases that I just said, right? So that's one of them. And we've had that controversy around here. I think there was a lot of goodwill and people not understanding, but that's a baseline of this. We're never going to get students to feel fully. What we try to do, they're going to feel things, is get them to see, to think, to make decisions. But we've got to understand the past is not just in the past. All right, so I want to very briefly run through one of my favorite simulations that is like a junior type of simulation. As in, it's not super involved. There are not like dedicated roles that are played out. So this is one that I do in my US 2 classes here. I've taught this in high school. I teach it here. Obviously, I teach it in different ways. But this is one where I tell students that they are going farming. So I have this whole setup. Like half of my teaching is like, really poor stand-up comedy. You always have those things that you throw out. So I usually pick a place. I'm like, oh, pretend you're from some hopeless, desolate landscape. And then I know where kids are from. I'm like Birmingham or, Boston. Like, it just depends on where I just pick on someone. And you're going to go strike it rich. And of course, where do you go to get rich in America? Nebraska. So the simulation here is late 19th century. We've already talked about urbanization. Right, we've talked about this entire context, people moving there, movement to wage labor, these types of things. Well, now, those people need to eat, so what you're going to do is move to Nebraska, you're going to grow things to ship to the cities, and you're going to get rich off of it. So that's what they are, they're farmers. So this is the setup. We won't go through the stages, but you'll see how I continuously mess with them. I am the banker in this simulation. I generously, out of the kindness of my heart, give them $2,000. And because I know they want to make it, I'm only going to ask them to pay the interest, not the principal. So you're going to owe some money to me. You have to set aside $200 for transportation and the mortgage interest for me, and $300 for living expenses each year. They're super excited about that. $300 a year to live off of. Sounds fantastic. You're going to decide which items to farm. Show them that in a second. You have a recorder. I'll show you the methods that I use for this. I give them a sheet and they fill it out. And then I have them set a goal. They're going to get rich. So what does it mean to get rich for them? How much money do they want to make? And they have no idea what a proper goal is to make. They have no idea what it's going to be. It frustrates the snot out of them, and it's beautiful. Or if they're like, some are like, $90,000. Good luck, because did you do math on that? Or some are like, not being poor. I don't know. They make different things. And so here's how the simulation goes. Farming, the best one is probably this. So the way it works, each crop, they pay $50 to plant. They have 16 plots to be able to do this for. So they can distribute it however they want, but they can't just endlessly plant stuff because you have to have enough land, right? So they can come through this and they can say, we're going all out on field peas. They just love field peas, and so they do it. You can distribute 2 of all 8 of them however you want. But that's going to limit, you can only invest so much in that. So the rest of your money, you can go in livestock, right? I just really love these pictures. Because that sheep, most of all, I have this whole little routine about that sheep knows what's going on. There's just all sorts of, that sheep, that is not a passive sheep. It knows. Cattle, sheep, hogs, $5 each. At this point, you don't have to worry about land. You can get unlimited because you can graze them on public lands. All this is historically accurate for the times. So they then decide what they want to do. Right? I tell them they have a sheet right there. This is the sheet that I use. So they get these. I give them 4 of them. They say what year it is, how much money you have. First year it's $2,000 minus expenses, $500, $1,500. They can keep some money in savings. I emphasize to them, if you don't invest it, you're not going to make anything. It's going to be there, but you're going to have expenses next year. It's called overhead, right? We go through this. They have it. And then, all right, we come back. They figure out what they're going to do. They're working in groups, right? Small families now. And then that's my sound of time travel. Serious lack of early spring rain in July almost destroyed the wheat, barley, oat crop. Prices paid for corn, beans, field peas, tobacco are up. Cattle prices are depressed. The price for sheep is up. The price paid for hogs is an all-time high. Right? All this is historically accurate, though I changed the numbers to manipulate them. And what happens is they take everything, they go to the railroad, they ship it to market, and this is their return. And they take that same sheet and they figure out how much they had. So if they had 2 of corn, they go through, well, now they made $200 off their $100 investment. They figure out how much money they have, and everything's great. All right, so we talk about this. We take a stop. How'd you do? How'd everything go? And then we go, all right, well, now that's next year. Right? So we're going to do it again. Oh, wait. It turns out the railroad company that you ship all your goods to, that you absolutely have to use, they say they're raising their prices by $50 this year. And you say, shenanigans! So you go to another railroad company. It turns out they also have raised their prices $50. Actually, every railroad has the exact same price. And you have to get your goods to market, so you really don't have a choice. So now, this year, expenses are $550. You're like, so they go through, they figure out what's going to happen. They do it again this year. Coldest winter in history, temperature 6 degrees below zero. This is true. Destroyed most of the cattle and hogs. Sheep prices are high, right? These have done well. These are stagnant. Bean crops, small yield. Field hay prices depressed. And this is what we get. And this is the fun one, because someone's going to go all in on one of these, and they're going to have virtually nothing, and it's beautiful. Right? Someone went high on sheep, and they are loving it and rubbing their faces and everything. So they have this. They make money. And this is where I start to go again, checking in. Well, how much money do you have? How much money do you have? And this is where, depending on the situation, I start playing with them. It could be one group. Part of this, I know my students generally by now. Part of it is I'm making points. So if this group comes in and I say, how much money do you have? They've done really well. Y'all have $2,800. I say, oh, that's fantastic. Y'all are doing so well. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and give you, do you want another $500 to invest? And sometimes the group says yes, so I give them another money. Sometimes they say no, it goes through. But the establishment is they've done well, I'm going to give them more money. I go to this group, randomly chosen, and they've done terribly, right? So they only have now $1,200 left. And I say, ooh, I'm not sure I trust you with my money. I'm going to need $500 of my principal back. And they don't have a choice, so they subtract another $500. They have $700 now. They're ticked off, right? And I do this, play around with them. And then we come to the next year. Oh, turns out $50 more this year. All the railroads have raised their prices. They come through. This is what they have. They have to invest more. It really messes with this group over here. They're like, oh, we have $100. Yeah, we're going to strike it rich. They almost always go in with like cows or something. They're like, I'm just going to buy a bunch of cows. Crops go through. Nature dealt a crushing blow to farmers. Hot, dry spring with little rain. Plague of grasshoppers infested the crops. Cattle prices are very good as the range herds have not yet recovered, right? Most of the cows died last year. This year, good prices. Sheep prices are depressed, but hogs are good. And so this is what they get. Now, I have pretended we're doing 4 years. We only ever do 3 years. I figured out the first few times I did this, I've got to lie to them. Because if they know they're only doing 3 years, by the time they get to the third year, they just throw it all out there. They come to, they see how they are. They think we're doing another year. I check in with them again, and I do that whole banker thing. With some of them, they come in, maybe this group, they did well, but they have $400. They had a good return. I say, you owe me $1,500. I need my $1,500 back. They say, we don't have $1,500. I say, oh, it's okay. You give me what you have left, and you can sell all your possessions, all the land, all your house, everything, and then we'll sell that. And actually, since I'm the one that you owe, the debtor, I actually get to determine the worth of those things, so I'll take care of it. You don't have to. I'll sell everything. And it turns out if you sell everything you own except for the clothes on your back and 3 pairs of shoes, that you pay me everything that you have, and so we're even. So good luck. And usually one other group, I'll give them more money and reward them, right? So we go through this thing. And then that's the last year. Did you make a profit? Did you do it? So what happens with all this is the simulation, right? There's no, you're doing this, you have this. They aren't doing research. It's very basic. It's all isolated to my room. Some get upset. Some are excited. Some get super into it, and I have to remind them this isn't real. You're not farmers. You did nothing. But the whole point of it is the conversation right after when I say, okay, what did you like? What was fair? What was unfair? And they point out the issues. One, we had no idea really how to invest our money, right? Because either something did well, so I think it's going to do well next year, or it did well, so it can't go well again. It's like an ontological understanding of reality. But you don't know. Weather affects everything you do, and you have no chance. What's stacked against you? Well, the banker, I'm a jerk. I can just take and give however I want. Transportation, there's a monopoly or there's collusion, right? So they're coming together and they're figuring it out, and we have to figure out, right? So they do this stuff. So once we've established that, the real turn is I say, all right, so fix it. And I put them back in their groups. And I say, since you've seen this, right? Of course they understand this. Simulation, this is what's going on with farmers at the time. So if this is what your life is like, fix it, make it better. What would you change? And then they have some time, they come back to me, they start going through, well, we do this and what have. And what we eventually get to, by them, as much as possible without me telling them, is the second half of this. This is what I'm giving you for, the top part I've done before for variation, but this is what we do. Election of 1896 and populism, right? Because they say they want to change laws and they want to do this, so, but the senators aren't going to let you. When they do, well, we have to be able to get rid of them, election, all this stuff, right? So in reality, all we're doing is teaching them this stuff. Now, there's possibility because we could do a great macroeconomic lesson. Students at all levels love macroeconomics. They're like, oh, the price of gold and devaluation of, right? It gets a little complicated. You can do it, but the way I do it now is a very simplistic simulation. And in some sense, they feel things. They feel the frustration of being farmers. They're not farmers. They don't know what it was like to be a farmer in the late 19th century. But the whole point of it is to give them a context for them to creatively try to figure out, what do you change? How do you fix the system? If you think that it's stacked against you, how do you make it better? And what we get to is the whole setup that we would go the next period of this last one. Modern American politics and economics, right? Because a graduated income tax is really well for people who produce things. The wage laborers hated it. But the producers were upset because the way they did taxes beforehand. And so what happens is people who live and work in cities, if they do well, the people who work on the farms, they do worse, and vice versa. And you get Mark Hannon, William McKinley, and you get the modernization of politics, and all of this stuff comes together, and then we understand parts. Right? So this is a simulation. But it's not terribly involved. It's one class period, they go through it. Right? There's variations, they're all together, they do it, but the point is for them to understand decision making. Right? So you can do those types of simulations. But there are other options, right? The simulations that we like to think about. So Don, if you could talk about that for a little bit. What does reacting do? What are the simulations that you do? How do you do it competitively so that people can see options?
So Reacting to the Past is a program that's primarily focused on college students of all levels. It's being done throughout the country, even in other countries, from community colleges to Ivy League schools, and everything in between. And it's very intensive. So the full-length games can take 5 weeks between the prep time, actually doing them, and then what's called the postmortem, which is these games they don't necessarily have to go historically accurate in the way that they turn out. Students have freedom of sort of choice in what happens, but at the end, of course, we have to set it back so that they understand, what the actual outcome was. So, for example, the Athens game is set at the end of the Peloponnesian War. And Athens is not, I mean, they're kind of a mess, right? And they've got different people have different ideas about what they want the outcome to be. Like, we're kind of starting over because Athens is pretty much destroyed. So what are we going to do? What kind of government are we going to have? And so there's 4 main factions. One of them, they're very much favor Socrates. So that's where Plato's Republic comes in. Like, everybody reads that because that's one of the main sort of viewpoints. Socrates thinks democracy is the most idiotic thing he's ever heard of. That you would put like plain people in charge of anything is something he thinks is stupid. And he has all these really crazy ideas of what that might actually look like. And then you have radical Democrats. Like, they want to execute Socrates. Like, they want to put him on trial and execute him. We have moderate Democrats, and then we have oligarchs. They're the ones that actually like Sparta, and they think that, you know, they're working behind the scenes with Sparta. And of course, if you're a true Athenian, that's going to be a problem for you. They're given competitive and objectives. So if some of them reach their objectives, others will lose and not obtain their objectives. They have to make their arguments through speeches, and then they turn in papers, which everyone else can see. So there's some peer pressure to do good research, to support things with documentation, whether it's primary sources or secondary sources. They have to write them in first person, and they have to present those speeches. And it's through those speeches that they try to pull people who are not in the factions, which are called indeterminates, to their side. So they want to pull these people to their side and grow in their numbers so they can win the votes. And they can bring things to votes, because the whole setting is that they're in the assembly. And so they can make decisions. They can make decisions on, are women going to be educated? Because Socrates thought that women should be educated, which is something that was totally counter to Athens at that time. They can decide things like, are they going to free this? I had one group that tried to free all the slaves. So then it took me like 3 hours of research to try to figure out what that would do. We have all kinds of things that can happen. And even some of the indeterminates have secret things that they're trying to accomplish. One of them is actually trying to raise an army and come back and take over Athens himself. So if they decide that they're not going to protect themselves and rebuild their walls, they're actually vulnerable to this guy who's coming back to get them. So all of those things are very, very complicated. And in this sort of game, not everything's happening in the class. A lot of things are happening outside. So my students I've had students spend over 20 hours a week in the library working in teams trying to win the game without me assigning them anything, which I think is just incredible. The idea is that they're in this liminal space, that when they're playing the game, they only call each other by their game names, which are mostly real people, but also people who are kind of based on, what we would expect. And when we end the game, they remove that identity and become themselves again, because otherwise they'll continue to attack each other for years. It puts them in this world, kind of like a video game, I guess. My kids are playing Fortnite when I left today. But it's this liminal space where things are very real, but it's very fake too. And they just become a part of that. And it just grips them. And they know the history a lot better than they would if they studied for a test. And they get all these skills. And like I said before, I've had a student who didn't talk to anybody the entire time he had been here. Had been through some trauma as a kid, just hated the world. And through this game, we discovered he was a leader, and he had amazing skills, and he actually was a very friendly person, and it broke through all of that. And we've also had students on campus who become friends, and years later I'll see them walking around. And so it's really incredible. Now, reacting is college level. But there are people who have done it in high schools, and there's a few people who've done it in junior highs, but that you have to modify the games. And that takes a lot of work. I had a student, an honor student, who did an honors thesis and took this into a room with reading deficient students and like worked on how that would help them to learn to read and to sort of engage them. So it can be done in other things, but reacting is one of those things that is probably going to be the most extreme of these sort of simulations. And if you were going to do something with reacting, you would need to go to one of their institutes and play these games to get an idea of kind of how they are, because otherwise it's just absolutely terrifying. It really is as a teacher. Yeah.
I've visited several university websites that have patented these simulations and stuff, and it's really helpful because you can take them and tweak them and downgrade them a little bit, modify them for your age group. But for somebody who's wanting to customize something different, are there any websites or resources that could help guide? Because it's very difficult to do something from scratch, even with
Yeah, I'll give you, and we'll have for this session and for some others, we'll have for this presentation, everything that we've talked about. I'll give you a list of some internet resources, including the reacting stuff. You can, they still have it, right? If you sign up, you can have it free, you can have access.
So with reacting too, there are also short games. There's games that you can play in like an hour and a half or an hour. There's one called Bomb the Church that's super simple. It's kind of like the enemy is like in the church, and you have to decide, but there's precious artifacts, like if you think of Notre Dame, like that kind of thing, and you're deciding whether you're going to like save the artifacts and the precious things that are in there for the town, or whether you're going to just bomb the church to get rid of the enemy that's inside. And it's a very fast-paced, not very complicated kind of thing. So there's other options on reacting as well that would be easier to deal with, at least at first.
Yeah. I've seen, I'll look through and try to clue them. I've seen some places that try to teach you how to do it. Honestly, to me, they've been worse than me just trying to do it, because as you said, it is daunting, but because you're going to have to, it's much easier to me to see options and to say, I'm going to do the same type of thing with this information than it is actually building a simulation from scratch in some sense. Right, so you'll see some different kind of genres or types of simulations that I think are a little bit better. I mean, I have one that I think the basis was kind of a balance of power game of Europe, like kind of 18th century balance of power thing. And I basically took part of that idea and created like a diplomacy game that I do in my World War II class. That was people trading and how they do it. So I took the idea, made it much shorter. It's like half a class period and you do it. To me, that's the easier way. A bunch of examples, especially shorter examples, and then saying, oh, okay, well, I can plug this in here and do it in that way. Because it takes a while from scratch.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things of opening yourself up to, and it sounds like a lot of you have done this kind of thing in the past, but to break yourself out of that sort of traditional mold, then you're going to be, if that works out okay, then you're going to be willing to try other crazy things, that your colleagues think are nuts at times. But those, it breaks you out of that and makes you be able to be more creative. So the idea is to be willing to say, you know what, I can figure something out. I can try something. And if it works, it's great, I'll do it again. If it doesn't, then I won't. As long as you stay out of the really controversial kinds of things. Like reacting does have a civil rights game, but everybody is African American. And it's the different groups trying to figure out, like, are we going to be peaceful? Are we going to be violent? Are we, like, what kind of strategy are we going to have to accomplish our goals? Not like a black versus white kind of, so some of those types of time periods can be addressed, but it's just the way in which you do it.
And a lot of that is forethought, right? The point of this is not, and this is part of a larger cultural discussion, but it's not even a question of like political correctness. It's a question of pedagogy and responsibility, right? I mean, if you're saying you're going to do this, there's no possible way for you to achieve that. Like, it's just, what assessment are you going to do to say that now students know what it's like to be? You can't. So you try to find some position that you think about how that's the application of it, right? We're not just going to do something to do it, we're going to figure it out. And as you can see, it doesn't have to be like some deep epistemological understanding. It can just be something of, we've experienced this enough that when I talk about it, you have some idea of what I'm saying. It's not from scratch, it's not cold, right? That's what a lot of simulations are. They're kind of warming you up unless you do fully immersive.
And if you
This is
do
not-
fully immersive, one of the critical things too is reflection.
Yeah.
I don't think you should ever do it without doing reflection, because reflection allows them to kind of think through the experience that they had, which, I mean, it can really affect you. It can affect you for months. I mean, when I went to the Institute and played games, I thought about that position for a very long time beyond what the actual experience was. And so having the students go through reflection, figuring out kind of what it means to them and how it affected them, will help them if there's anything sort of left over that they need to work their way through, or if you need to work your way through something with them, because it's a deep experience.
Yeah, I just had a question about so the Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC, they'll give out ID cards for educators to use in their classrooms. Have you guys ever used something like that? Because I mean, simulations for the Holocaust, like you said, really no. But how do you use those in a way to teach with? I don't know how to teach with them without doing some type of not simulation, but
Yeah. So I think part of that is semantics, but part of it actually is technically the pedagogy that you're using. That actually falls more in line of using material cultures. As opposed to simulations, as long as you aren't in any way, I've given you this as an ID tag and now you are going to be. The simulation is you acting on behalf of or acting in a position. I think those aspects of material culture are incredibly useful. In the same way that you can teach about, say, kind of the slavery in life on a plantation by showing, even if you say, well, I know slave quarters were generally done in a certain way, you can measure off something of a room and have people and do it. You're not going to practice people being slaves, but you can, in a physical aspect, look around and people say, oh, wait, this is the space that I lived in, right? You don't then simulate anything, and that really isn't a simulation. It's a material, physical aspect of people understanding, okay, right, that's a different realization. So that technically isn't a simulation, somewhat semantics, but in reality it's more materiality, right? So we're physically seeing or understanding something as opposed to I'm taking a position. Yeah, that's right.